All right, everybody, I am back. And as I promised, I was going to get some Elvis and Kathy reading in. We're on page 108 right now. Before I get started, got some cool Elvis cards in. These are some 1950, 1960, not the year 50, but they call them 50, 60. So somewhere between 1950 and 60, these cards were produced. Some great little cards that would go with my collection. Y'all have seen plenty of them. But, you know, Elvis and Kathy, I apologize, I have not gotten to reading as much as I did. But of course, with the release of From Here to the Great Unknown and all the stuff going on with Priscilla potentially crashing the show with Riley, it's been a bit of a storm out there. So I wanted to cover that as well. So let's get to it, okay? Thanks for listening to this reading and reading along with me. For those of you that make it all the way through to the very end of each of these readings, that's awesome. Please continue to show your super fandom of Elvis and this channel, and let me know that you made it through all the way to the end. So let's get started, okay? At that time, Elvis was the only single star to sell out 4 performances at the Garden. After the New York triumph, Elvis was ecstatic, and we were too. But then it was time to pack up and head for Fort Wayne and the Midwest. We went on the rave reviews in Evansville, Chicago, Milwaukee, Wichita, and Fort Worth. You can see there was very little time for worrying about much of anything but keeping your voice intact, making sure you were in the lobby to catch a bus for somewhere, and hoping that precious luggage was in the right place at the right time. I still remember happy times on the bus heading for a hotel, and all of us singing along in a free-spirited way to the tune of Auld Lang Syne. We're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here. I still have vivid memories of jumping onto the bus with James Burton. Since we were usually the ones to show up on time, we usually got the front seats, and James was always pointing out his favorite obsession, cars, to me. Kath, look at that 67 Ford Corvette. Sure wish I had that sitting home in my garage. One time his wife Louise told me she noticed an abandoned car parked across the street from their house and called the police to have it removed. The officer came to the door and said, "Miss Burton, this car is registered in your husband's name. It belongs to you." James said, yeah, sorry, honey. I forgot to tell you. I bought a new car. I believe this was number 37 in his extensive collection. On other bus rides, I would sit down next to Glindy Harden, who was a good friend and a genius, and one of the most hilarious men I've ever met. He'd say, "All right, boys and girls, get your bop suits on. Get ready for rock and roll. We're going to beat them tonight. 91-0. Glindy, a former member of Buddy Hollett's Crickets and member of Elvis's band, was a pianist who wrote some of Elvis's most stirring arrangements, including Bridge Over Troubled Water. His natural wit sparkled our conversations and kept the group's spirits up during our travels. Those were carefree times and still bring a smile when I think of them. But I also remember waking up in a room, thinking it was the room I was in the night before, and bumping into a wall as I headed to the bathroom, or walking into a closet instead of a bathroom, because that's where the bathroom had been in the room before in some other city. Your mind does play tricks on the road. Over the years, I was often asked, especially by foreign tourists who came to Las Vegas, when we would be going to Europe or to Japan. I wondered about that myself. Elvis had thousands of fans in England, and today, one of the most active fan clubs in the world is in England, but we never went there. I was told it was because there just wasn't enough auditoriums that were big enough, or arenas big enough to accommodate the number of people needed to make those kind of tours pay for themselves. That may be true, but another theory came up often enough to make me wonder. I had heard several times through the years that Colonel Parker was not a citizen of the U.S. and had no passport, which was the reason he never booked Elvis in a foreign country. We never even went to Canada, but always stayed on United States soil. However, Elvis had been there once early in his career in '56. Now, there are many people over the country who picture Colonel Parker as a Southern gentleman with the honorary title of Colonel. To set the record straight, Colonel Parker did not have a Southern accent, but a Dutch accent. Perhaps it was the fact that he had gone into artist management from the Carnival and then handled only country western singers before Elvis. What could be more American than that? Colonel Parker, it turned out later, was not a native born American, but rumor has it he was really Dutch and jumped ship in New York City. There was only a certain degree of openness about Colonel Parker, and he only let you see what he wanted you to see. In fact, he was a very mysterious man at times, and it was difficult some days to understand him. I was under contract to Elvis from trip to trip and tour to tour. I had little to do with the Colonel, although he did have me under contract for a record deal with his own label, Boxcar Records. And the truth is that Elvis didn't talk to him that much either. The Colonel talked business and bookings, but there was never any kind of obvious personal relationship. It was all business. You got the feeling that if there was no business to transact, the two men were at a loss to find some common conversational ground. Years later, when a lawsuit was filed against the Colonel by the Elvis Presley estate, it is said that the Colonel ignored it, saying he did not have to honor the lawsuit settlement because he was not a U.S. citizen. If that is true, then it also solves the mystery once and for all as to why we never went to England or Japan or tour, even though thousands of fans were waiting for Elvis to come to their countries. In fact, he had a big following in West Germany, France, Spain, Belgium, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Hey, if you're on here from those countries, let me know. Leave a comment. I know Elvis definitely wanted to go and would have had it been possible. He told me many times that he was going to tour Europe and some of the Orient someday, but nothing ever came to it. Some of the band members and I would find motel rooms with a kitchen when we were in Las Vegas. We'd head to the nearest market, buy all kinds of food, and cook and eat like starving pilgrims. I can't tell you how I felt about standing in a kitchen and cooking my favorite dishes, lounging in a quiet place where nobody knew who I was, and where I knew when the telephone rang that it had to be somebody from the show. It was pure heaven. One day, Estelle, Myrna, Sylvia, and I cooked pork chops and greens, and I downed 10. And these weren't the little bitty ones either. They never let me forget that. If we stayed in a motel on the outskirts of town, away from the hotel where we were performing, we had to drive to the hotel, didn't have room service, and had to drag our own luggage around, so it was pretty inconvenient, and we didn't have to do that very often, though. But when we did, it was just a great delight, and I felt as if I had been on vacation when I returned to the old routine. There's a special camaraderie, that happens between sidemen on the road day after day. I learned a lot from the Sweets, and we got along well over the years. Although all three of them were black and I was the only white girl, I don't think any of us even noticed what color we were after the first day we met. The black versus white differences really never came up in our friendships, although I noticed it in our music. They would sit backstage and think of rhythmical, boy, I can't pronounce that. They came up with patterns that were rhythm, and notes that no white person I knew would ever dream up. Rhythmical. Huh. I'm going to have to figure that out. This should drive me crazy. These girls had won a Grammy for their background work with Aretha Franklin and were the originators of the ah-ooh sound. In fact, Myrna Smith, Sylvia Shimwell, Estelle Brown, Cissy Houston, which was Whitney Houston's mom, Dionne Warwick and her sister Dee Dee, and Aretha all went to the same church in New Jersey and sang there. What a choir that must have been. One night they all got together, with the exception of Sissy, and we went to the Tropicana for an impromptu jam session. The memory that stands out most is that of Aretha. I don't even remember the song she sang, but I was in awe. Here she was with a band she'd never seen before or met, wailing her heart out, and I thought to myself, now that's singing. One night, we all got together, with the exception of Sissy, and we went to the Tropicana for an impromptu jam session. The memory that stands out the most is that of Aretha. I don't even remember the song she sang, but I was in awe. Here she was with a band she'd never seen before or met, wailing her heart out, and I thought to myself, now that's singing. Myrna and I went out together another night and ended up at the casino watching the gamblers at the Flamingo Hotel. A rather nice nice-looking man came up to us and said, "Are you working, girls?" "Yes," we answered. "Where do you work?" he asked with increasing interest. "At the Hilton," we said. "Well, what are your hours?" "Oh, we just got off," we replied. You girls don't have any idea of what I'm talking about, do you? That was the night we learned about working girls and what that meant. There were only 4 women with the Elvis tour, the 3 sweet inspirations and myself. I just had to learn how to be one of the boys, which sometimes tried my patience a bit, because at times their language got a bit rough and their jokes ribald, if not outrageous. But all in all, I got along with them, and in many ways they spoiled me rotten, and I didn't mind a bit. However, at times it became a bit trying, especially if any were involved with women other than their wives. If a woman answered the phone in their rooms, they would say, "That was just Kathy." One time, the wife of one of the guys was with us on a closing night in Vegas and mentioned how very much she had enjoyed chatting with me on the telephone. Well, I'd never chatted with her on the telephone, and I tried to change the subject before she asked me questions about our supposed conversation. That really annoyed me, but I could never stop the fellas from doing it. In fact, I'm sure I didn't have any idea just how many times they'd used me as some kind of an excuse. Well, because the colonel's office was concerned that something might go wrong, we were never supposed to leave the tour once we started, but sometimes I did. One night, J.D. Sumner, our wonderful bass singer, talked me into singing at a gospel convention with him in Nashville. Well, we were playing Dayton, Ohio, and we flew out to Nashville at midnight, and we didn't get back to Dayton until 7 o'clock in the morning and barely made the bus call. Another time, before an evening show, J.D. leased a car and we drove to a nearby city to do another gospel performance. Because there was so little time between the shows, I had to sing at the gospel show dressed in a scanty costume I wore in the Elvis show. JD took one look at me and said, "Kathy, be sure to keep your coat on." Well, I did. No matter how debilitating it was for us to even be on the road, it was every bit as debilitating to Elvis. He always managed to keep going no matter what. In fact, he seemed to thrive on it. In spite of sore throats, head colds, and lack of rest, Elvis was always ready for a show. Even though he had pneumonia several times while we were traveling, he threw out so much energy and the throbbing crowds threw it back in such great quantity that I sometimes wondered if we really needed electricity because there was so much being generated right from that stage. Elvis sang his heart out, and as the crowds got louder and louder and the stage vibrated as if we were experiencing a major earthquake, it couldn't help but affect me, and I would respond with such enthusiasm that my fatigue or any other trouble would be lost in the sheer joy of what we were all doing. I remember when conductor Joe Gershio thought he had a good idea when he suggested they start the show with the disco version of Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra, otherwise known as the theme from 2001, A Space Odyssey. Well, Joe wanted me and the Sweets to go into a repeated vamp of the King of Rock and Roll, the King of Rock and Roll, the King of Rock and Roll. And I looked over at Myrna and said, "He's not going to like this." "Well, you'd better tell him," she said. Elvis came up from downstairs dressing room to hear us. We were in rehearsal for our opening in Las Vegas. He very politely listened and then he said, "I've got to think about it." I could see it in the eyes that he didn't like it. He went back to the dressing room and then discreetly sent word through Charlie to cut out the King lyrics. Not only did he dislike being called King on religious grounds, but he never accepted the title of the King of Rock and Roll. One night, I remember in his suite in Vegas, Elvis had a yawning fit. That's about where I'm at right too. Yeah, excuse me. Made me yawn. One followed the other, and we couldn't seem to stop. "You know what that means?" he asked. "It means I'm tired," was my reply. Nah, Mary Tyler Moore told me once that when you yawn like this, it means you just don't even want to go on stage. That's what it means, subconsciously. We don't want to go on stage. Well, we went on stage anyways, of course, and yawning was replaced by a tremendous amount of energy that grew with each song. I sang better than I had been singing. A couple of times that night, Elvis would sneak a look at me and wink and smile. It was as if he was saying, "I love it, baby. I love it." I did too. So much for Mary Tyler Moore's theory. I still think we were yawning because we weren't out there performing and we were a little flat out tired. Well, being on tour together, I soon found out didn't mean that Elvis and I would see more of one another. Not long after our second tour began, an article appeared in a movie fan magazine about Elvis and his dark-haired singer Millie traveling together. Of course, Millie had left the show months before, but Priscilla saw it and knew the writer was talking about Kathy Westmoreland, and that's when Elvis decided we had to cool it. "Oh, they're onto us, Minnie Mouse," he told me. So I began to travel on the show plane and not Elvis's plane. This meant that many times Elvis would stay over and I would go ahead on the plane and wouldn't see him until we were on stage together. Then Elvis might leave for another city and I would stay over. Eventually we would be in the same city overnight, but it wasn't as often as I would have liked. When we did see one another, we both bubbled over with things we had saved up to tell each other. Something we had read, something we had heard, a new song, an idea, all sorts of conversation that had been bottled up for days. I can still picture us, me wearing one of his pajama tops as usual, both sitting in bed talking or reading a new book aloud to one another, and he would put his arm around me and say, "God knew what he was doing when he sent you to me. I love you, Kathy. You really do wonders for me." He worked both ways. Elvis did a lot for me too. He made me wonder who I really was, what kind of person was beneath those layers of preconceived notions, Most of all, he gave me the strength to handle my own beliefs, to measure my own talent, to perform and sing with a freedom I had never known. He was always the stabilizing influence in times of crisis. He gave me the ecstasy of being myself. He gave me wings and showed me how to fly. I believe those are the greatest gifts a man can give to a woman. And really, greatest gifts a woman can give to a man as well. That's me adding that. That's not Kathy. Chapter 5. Elvis fans are wonderful. Well, let's go. It says up here, they see themselves in me. That's all. That's what Elvis Presley said. Elvis fans are wonderful. They are loyal, enthusiastic, considerate, and run the entire spectrum from young to middle age and the elderly. He appealed to men and women, probably because they relate to him. He was every man, a performer who came from poverty and never forgot his southern manners and never tried to hide his background. In fact, he was proud of where he came from and what he had accomplished. The fans related to this and loved him. They bought over 2 billion of his records and went to his movies, good or bad, bought every available tickets for his concerts, and hundreds of thousands are still active Elvis fans, even though a decade has passed since his last performance. Today, the fans are like my extended family, and we've been through a lot together. In return for his fans' loyalty, Elvis loved them right back. He gave them his best, regardless of the pain that he was suffering or even during personal tragedies. He never turned down an autograph or a legitimate request and always kept the cost of his concerts down so even the less fortunate could afford to attend. There are millions of fans around the world who respected his personal wishes and loved his music. But when you deal with millions of people, you're gonna have some that are not as considerate as the majority. Most superstars have the same problem. The warmth of love the fans felt for Elvis also included the people who worked and performed with him. They always felt that anyone connected with Elvis also had some kind of special magic, and they greeted all of us with rousing enthusiasm. However, a fan went overboard and were extreme in their determination to be near Elvis or be near someone who was near Elvis. Well, I was the victim of these type of fans more than once. I think there were several reasons why I was often singled out by some of the more irrational fans. Well, I sang duets with Elvis, and in later tours I sang solos, and I'm small and slight, which perhaps makes me appear more accessible and vulnerable. I was also introduced during every performance, not as part of the group, but as an individual, and my name stood out over many of the others. I think that this was brought home to me when I did that first show with Elvis in Vegas. Up to this time, when I had been on the road, the opera, boring music, Kathy, and the Sandpipers, they were fans, but they were not nearly as dedicated or determined. So I was not prepared for the radical change when I started working for Elvis. I became an instant celebrity because I was appearing on the same stage as their idol. And Elvis introduced me at every show. The little girl with the beautiful high voice, Kathy Westmoreland. Well, the only other women in the show were the Sweet Inspirations, and they were introduced as a group and not by individual names. For instance, my mother tried to call me at the hotel where we were staying in Chicago, but couldn't get through. I was rather upset when I found out about it, and I naively called the hotel operator and complained. This is Kathy Westmoreland, and my mother tried to call me, and they wouldn't put her through. Well, the operator sounded misbelieving. Miss Westmoreland, I can't begin to count the number of people who called today asking for you and saying that they were your mother, or your sister, or some kind of relative. You would never have had any rest if I put all those calls through. I hung up, bewildered. Why would people want to talk to me? I was just a singer in the show, and my introduction had been rather casual. How could they even remember my name? Well, it didn't take me long to find out that any name on the Elvis show was noted and documented forever in the memory of loyal fans. Once in Fayetteville, North Carolina, after I'd been on several Elvis tours, a girl called me to say that someone she overheard talking to one of her friends were wondering how much Elvis would pay to get me, Kathy, back if they kidnapped me. I thought it was just another strange call and told the girl I know he wouldn't pay a dime to get me back. Well, I wasn't upset by the call, but after thinking about it, decided to mention the telephone call to Dick Robb, who was Elvis's chief of security at the time. Well, I was smiling when I told him the story, as if it were some kind of sick joke. Well, Dick didn't smile. He took the call seriously and said he wanted someone with me all the time. However, that night at the auditorium, the Sweet Inspirations were on stage doing the numbers, and I went back to the dressing room. The auditorium in Fayetteville was like a gymnasium, and the dressing rooms were located near an unlighted, dark, isolated area by stacks of bleachers and storage, and much further away from the stage than most dressing rooms. It didn't even enter my mind to let anyone know that I was going to the dressing room by myself. Well, I walked in and started to undress and put on my costume when a filthy-looking man popped out from under a table. I can't remember much about his height or his face except that he had a real dirty, almost oily blonde hair. But I'll never forget his eyes. They were bleary and crazy looking. I started screaming and then I ran as fast as I could down the hall and the man was running after me. I spotted a security guard, very old and stoop-shouldered, a man who should have never been a security guard, and I tried to tell him what had happened, but all I could do was scream even more. He just looked bewildered. Others heard me and started running. They spotted the man who by now had run into a stack of stored bleachers and was hiding. They kept searching for him, but by then it was time for me to go on stage. Somehow I'd made it and finished the performance, but I can't tell you how badly shaken I was by that experience. They did find the man and arrested him, but I never knew what happened to him after that. I'm not even sure that the girl's telephone call about the kidnapping was related to the man in the dressing room. And if you want to know the truth, I didn't want to know. Not all of the experiences were that traumatic, though. Vernon, Elvis's father, met me in the elevator one time, and he told me there was a lady running up and down the hotel hallway calling, "Kathy, Kathy! They were going to get you with the microwaves." When she spotted Vernon, she told me to be sure to warn me. They were going to get you. They were going to get you with the microwaves, huh? On another occasion, I walked into my room, and there was this man, woman, and 2 children waiting for me. The man was wearing a holstered gun. "Kathy, at last you're back," said the woman who I never set eyes on in my life. "Who are you?" I asked. "Oh, we just wanted to see you and talk to you," she replied. "Well, how'd you get into my room?" A fair question was under the circumstances. "Well, we just told the clerk downstairs that I was your sister and you were expecting us." She answered in a voice that revealed pride in her own resourcefulness. "Well, you can just leave," the bodyguard with me said angrily. I was more upset with the stupid clerk at the desk than I was with the family. Without much fuss, my bodyguard got him out of the room and away from me. Then he went down to the hotel management and had a few choice words with him about security for all of us working in the show. That's where we're going to leave it for tonight. And we'll get started back again tomorrow. But I definitely wanted to give you some of the Elvis and Kathy that y'all been wanting. Some great little stories. Got a little bit of Elvis in there, a little bit of Kathy in there, and some kind of scary stories. So TCB, TLC, till next time. I hope you enjoyed that. And as usual, if you don't know how to find the playlist or the podcast that have the book readings, just click on Rare Elvis Photos below the video that you're watching, and it'll open up and you'll see a list of podcasts, playlists, stuff like that. And you'll see the Elvis and Kathy playlist as well as the Child Bride. The Truth About Elvis and Priscilla's got another podcast, and the Rare Elvis Photos, which has some of these videos, but then it has other videos of pictures of Elvis. And then, of course, My Army Days with Elvis by Johnny Lang. So, well, have a wonderful evening. I am still recovering from vacation, and hopefully I'll be more recovered tomorrow when I don't have a show, just saying, and I can read you more. All right, till next time, this is Rare Elvis Photos.